Okay, this video is going to cover briefly information on how to graph rational functions, or in some case people call them the reciprocal functions because you have 1 over x. Okay, so I'm going to show you what the graph looks like and why it looks that way by using a table. And I'm going to pick values purposefully between -2 and 2. So -2, -1, I'm going to use a half in here. I'm going to use 0, 1/2, 1 and 2. And I'm just picking these numbers because they kind of center around the middle. And you can see that you end up with like 2 different shapes. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to plug these x's into this function here, this expression I should say, it's just 1 over x, to get the y values that go with it. So I'm going to do any sight work I need over here. Okay, the first one shouldn't be too bad because it's just 1 over -2. So 1 divided by -2. And that's just a -1/2. Okay, so my first point, let's go ahead and put some lines here. My first point is -2, -1/2. So -2, -1/2, somewhere right there. Okay, ignore those extra points. They're just kind of ink blots. Next one is going to be -1. So 1 divided by -1. 1 divided by -1 is just -1. Okay, so -1, -1. Right there. And now we have kind of a tricky one. So this one right here is a little bit tricky because it's a fraction under another fraction. So I'm going to do some sight work on this one. It's going to be 1 divided by, so 1 divided by x, which is -1/2. So -1/2. If you do this mathematically, you have to remember the rules of dividing fractions. So the rules say you take the first number, so 1, turn the division into multiplication, and flip the second one, so 2 over -1. And this is the operation that you would be doing. So 1 times 2 is 2. 2 divided by -1 is -2. Okay? If that's too difficult, what you can also do is just think about this logically. So if you're trying to divide 1 into halves, well, let's take a pizza, for instance. So let's say we have a pizza, okay, pepperoni, whatever. This is 1 whole. And we're dividing it into halves. So if I divide this in half, well, I have, it's a different color here. I have 1/2 right here, so that's 1. And I have another half over here. So I have a total of 2 halves. And that's where that 2 comes from. But of course it's negative because, well, there was a negative involved. Okay? Moving on. 0. So 1 divided by 0, that is undefined because we cannot divide by 0. And that is on purpose because if you notice in a little bit, we're going to have these weird looking lines that go through the middle that are kind of important. Okay? 1/2 is next. So based on what we know from this part, this is just going to be +2. Okay? And I forgot to plot that. So let's plot the other one real quick. So -1/2, -2. That's right here. That's the point that I did earlier. Okay, 0 has nothing, so we're not going to plot anything. This is 1/2, 2. So 1/2, 2. Somewhere right there. And this is just a rough sketch. Okay. Then we have 1. So 1 divided by 1 is just 1. So 1, 1. And finally we have 2. So 1 divided by 2 is going to be 1/2. And that's 2, 1/2. So 2, 1/2. And it just kind of keeps going. So if we kept going with the numbers here, this would get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And this would go higher and higher and higher, but it would never actually cross the x or y, I'm sorry, the x or y axis. And the reason that is because we have these invisible lines. Okay, I'm just going to mark that. Called asymptotes. My students love when we say that word. So we have these invisible lines called asymptotes, and they are defined by x equals 0 because on this line x is always going to be 0, and this one is going to be y equals 0 because on this line y is always going to be equal to 0. So no matter what point I pick, y is still 0. Okay, and our actual graph looks something like this. And this is where we get those two curves from, okay? So that's what the graph looks like. Now, a few properties about this. Most teachers will probably ask you for the domain, for the range, okay? And then a couple other things. So let's look at the domain first. The domain for this is going to be, if you notice, this arrow goes forever to the left side. This one goes forever to the right side. So it kind of looks like it's all row numbers, but we have that middle part here that breaks it. So we're going to have to do two pieces. So this is going to be like one domain. This is going to be another one. When you have more than one, you usually combine it with a U, okay? So I'm going to use interval notation for this. Hopefully that's what you're familiar with. This side we're going to have all the way to negative infinity. Okay, that's the left side, and it goes all the way here. So it kind of stops here in the middle. Here in the middle would be 0. So we're going to have a negative infinity, comma 0. And I'm going to put a parenthesis on both of them because that's a 0, okay? On both of them because it doesn't actually touch 0. It just gets really, really close to it, okay? On the other side, we're going to have, well, the left side is this side, okay? So yeah, I know it's going up, but it gets really close to this line, which is again 0. And it goes forever to the right, which is infinity. So 0, comma, infinity. And that is our domain, okay? The range works really similarly because if you notice it goes forever down and it goes forever up. But again, we're broken up by that middle piece. So it's the same thing. Negative infinity to 0, and then 0 to infinity. So it's the same as the domain. Negative infinity to 0, united with 0 to infinity. Finally, you're probably going to be asked about the asymptotes, which is what I kind of mentioned here. So you have two. Okay, you have a vertical asymptote. Okay, and that is, it's a vertical line that the graph will never cross through. So in this case, it's this middle part right here. So this would be at x equals 0. Okay, and then you also have a horizontal asymptote. I'm just going to write, I guess I'll write the whole thing. And that is the horizontal line that the graph will never cross. That's going to be this one right here. So y equals 0. That's it. This is our information for the parents. Okay. In the next video, I'll show you really quickly how to deal with transformations with this general shape. Okay.